Thank you so much, Wilson College and the Political Science Department. I'm so honored to be here and so glad to come back to this place and talk to all of you. It's really amazing that Wilson College manages to pull off a human rights festival at a time when the word itself is taboo. It's not a word that our government likes to even acknowledge, and also demonizes, debunks people who work on human rights issues. It's really a very grim time that we are here today, and the fact that you all are celebrating a festival for the rights of people across political, social, economic rights, and are able to do this, I think, for the 4th year now. This is the 4th year running. It's really a big thank you to all of you for this. It's really amazing. I am going to be speaking about the human rights situation in the North-East as well as in Kashmir, two very, very different areas. I do want to say that I'm not an expert on either. I don't think I can claim to be an expert on either the North-East or Kashmir. As a journalist, I have had the opportunity to be able to look at the situation in both the North-East as well as in Kashmir, two very, very different situations, very different historical circumstances. And what I do want to present today is a little bit of the kind of questions, the kind of searchings, and the kind of information discussions that I would look at as a journalist, and more of the technical details, more of the historical details, the real, all the nuances, the complexities of both situations, I'm not going to go into today, because I think in any case, since you are all students of political science, I'm assuming that there will be some level of that kind of study in your classroom. I don't want to replicate that. So let me make that very clear at the beginning. What I do want to share with you is some of the work that some of us have done on the North-East as well as in Kashmir. Again, like I said, two different areas. And sum up to some extent the issues that we are looking at. So I'm going to start with a short film. It's actually an excerpt of a much longer bit of work that I had done in terms of oral history with a very senior woman journalist who covered the agitation in Assam from the very beginning. Her name is Sabita Goswami. She's relocated to Mumbai, and this is really an oral history. It's on YouTube, so you can go back and check it out, hopefully, on YouTube. So this is really a very, very small and very simple introduction to what is happening right now, and hopefully, some discussion on that.
And movement against outsiders. By 1983, it took on a bloody hue, targeting ethnic groups, minorities, and migrants, even as its economic woes and the exploitation of its natural resources remained unaddressed. As a pioneering woman journalist, Sabita Goswami provided a remarkable eyewitness account of the conflicts and challenges of this ignored region.
As it would have been 79, Assam agitation began, and world of North-Eastern part of India opened up to the world. Those days BBC always picked up without training, journalists without training. So they want to reach them their way. And I think I fit the bill. I have tremendous sources. I'm from terrorist to politician to bureaucrats to junior officers. They all trusted me. I don't know for what reason. It was in 19 draft NRC. And after that, when these agitation leaders after Assam, they went there and they saw it, that issue was taken up by C.S. Mulan then. So they took up the NRC issue as one of the important issues, that there should be NRC. No one. If 19 July 48 is the cutoff for India, why it won't be cutoff for us? That was their point, which was also justified if you look at it. But geographical scenario was different, and migration happens anywhere in the world. But they took up the issue, but it was such a, as I told, humongous human issue. So during Assam Accord, they didn't touch it. Assam agitation leaders, they signed the accord, but NRC was not touched. So it was, but one thing they did say, that whoever entered Assam prior to 24th March 1971, they can stay back. There should be PPD, detection, deletion from profession and deportation. That they did. But that question of deportation is not an easy thing. It has to be international treaty. Government of Assam also never pressurized Government of India for that. And Government of India also didn't care for it. So issue remains like that. Now that NRC has come, now what they will do, this 40 lakhs of people, I really don't know. After NRC, what? That was the big question. I think the government, the public man of Assam, and also statesmen of India should think it over. It has to be settled beyond political interest. Now, BJP, what I could gather, BJP was for keeping a Bengali Hindu. But all Assam students say union is against it, and people of Assam generally is against it. They said it has to go according to Assam Accord, where it was said that those who came before that are all will be taken. Post that they have to be deported. Now, the issue, these days I am not seeing much. I think the issue is dangling there now. But citizenship bill, I think there is a vociferous opposition in Assam, because BJP wants to keep the Bengali Hindus in Assam. That is there. But most important point is, where will these people go? None, the government or the public, no one is interested to know that. As I said, detention camp, now these 40,000 lakhs people, sorry, where are they? Where are they? There are no detention camps. I think 800 and something was there. That is also, it is not in conformity with international law. So it cannot happen, I hope. I hope it cannot happen. So it has to, pragmatically, it has to be discussed by the politicians and with the statesmen, if at all, in less somewhere, how to solve this problem. Issue is there, problem is there, has to be sorted out.
Journalism was my living in my life's struggle. Journalism became a passion for me. When I look back, I wonder if any of the analysis and writing ever had any impact on society, government, the attitude of the politicians? Did our news, our political articles, just remain as passing events? Savita Goswami, a journalist, remembers.
Yes, I think these are questions that we really have no answers for, but we need to look for them, we need to ask them. Sabita Goswami is, she's past 80 now, and like many of the journalists who covered the Assam agitation of the 80s, left with a lot of questions, a lot of soul searching on what exactly the agitation achieved, what was being done. Till about 3 years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, there was really no discussion as we are seeing so much of discussion on the NRC. There really wasn't as much outside of Assam. There was some amount of work and some amount of discussion and a lot of ferment, of course, which started building up as the deadlines that the Supreme Court had laid down for the NRC. So this, she refers to the 40 lakhs, but actually we now know that there are about 19 lakhs. At this point, of course, all of you are aware of the fact that Assam and major parts of the North-East are really burning. People have been on the streets for the last 2-3 days, ever since the Citizenship Amendment Bill has been passed yesterday in the Rajya Sabha, earlier in the Lok Sabha. It will most probably get presidential assent very soon. And people have been agitating in Assam, in Tripura, and there is a lot of ferment, a lot of fear, a lot of apprehensions about what this is going to mean, not just for the people of Assam, not just for the people of the North-East, but for people everywhere across India. Because what CAB has done, and like just quickly go into a PowerPoint on this, and then we could have some discussion on where this is heading. So this, as you can see, is it came in the Telegraph yesterday, and the North-East has really has been fairly quiet. Against, if you look at what is happening in Kashmir, in the North-East, and this is of course the situation there right now with the internet off, internet suspended in many parts of Assam and in Tripura. Why are these protests happening? What exactly is CAB? There is the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which, as some of you may have been reading in the papers about the provisions of the bill, it actually for the first time decides that the criteria of religion will come into applications for citizenship. And for the first time, there is a category of citizens who seek persecution from, or who seek freedom from persecution because of their religion, being given citizenship, being given preference for citizenship. And these are citizens from certain religious communities only. They are Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, Christians, Buddhists, but not Muslims. And for the first time, there's actually an attempt to say that one category of religious group will not be given citizenship, will not have to apply for citizenship under this. This is absolutely the first time in the 72 years of India's independence, where we had a constitution which enshrined the principles of equality before law and equal rights for all. It did not allow for any of this discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, creed, anything. For the first time, this is being brought into this country. There are, of course, discussions one can have about the finer aspects of this bill and how faulty it is, apart from this overriding principle of the bill, that it leaves out, you know, the Sri Lanka and Myanmar, because it only talks about religious persecution and Muslims who apply from Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan. It ignores religious persecution of minorities in all the other countries. In fact, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, there are religious minorities within the Muslims who are persecuted, but it completely has this kind of blanket notion that they are all put in one basket. So Ahmadiyas, for instance, or the Rohingyas in Myanmar are not even looked at separately. And the atheists, of course, in Bangladesh. For the last few years, we've been seeing a spate of killings of Bangladeshis who claim to be atheists and who say that they are atheist bloggers, mostly bloggers, of course. There's a big blogging movement in Bangladesh. But how does that affect what is happening here in Assam? Why are the people of Assam so agitated? Why are the people of the North-East so worried about what is going to be happening because of the passage of CAB? In ordinary circumstances, one would assume that CAB, being an extension of the NRC, which they have all supported, would be welcomed. But the people of Assam have had a long history. They've had a long, and like you saw in the earlier film, which Sabita does speak a little bit about, a long history of the fears of Bengali hegemony, and especially Bengali Hindu hegemony in Assam. As I just, I was coming here for this lecture, and there was someone from Assam who sent a very good piece about the kind of colonial settlement of Bengalis into Assam. So there's a long history, and it's a very, very intricate history. I'm not going into that right now. But the fears of this kind of hegemony is very strong, and especially when there are notions that the percentage of Assamese speaking population is reducing. The percentage of the Bengali speaking population has increased, but it's not really all that much of an increase. But there is this fear of being swamped, being taken over. There's also a lot of people from Assam and from the North-East say that there is such a dearth of resources, of actual resources in these states, and a sense that these resources are being divided by people who, people who just cannot afford that. So there is this fear of the outsiders. And as Sabita had spoken of, and if you see her film, the larger version of the film, and talk to a lot of people, there was a very strong communal turn that the agitation did take, because of which Muslims had been killed. There was the biggest massacre of Muslims in Assam, in Delhi, and in other parts of Assam. So the agitation went through that course. There was the Assam Accord, and then there was a complete standstill for many, many years till it actually moved from the Supreme Court into the NRC and what we see today, right now. So what the NRC really did in Assam was to exclude about 19 lakh people. Finally, from 40 lakhs, the figure came down to 19 lakhs, out of which there were about 5 lakh Hindus, and there were about 6 lakh Muslims who were left out of the NRC. And the ratio of Muslims left out of the NRC would be pretty much the ratio of the Muslims in the population out there. So it's pretty much almost all Muslims. And the process itself has been extremely dehumanizing and very, very alienating, very frightening for us, for the Muslims, because they had a list of about 10 documents which they had to submit to prove their citizenship, and several of them had to look for legacy documents. So I have a journalist friend, for instance, whose mother was left out of the NRC. She was in the NRC. The daughter was in the NRC, but the mother was left out. And the husband, the father, was in the NRC. So women mostly, and it's actually affected women in a big way, because women relocate. When they marry, they relocate. They move out of their natal homes to their marital homes. And then for them to find documentation to prove where they come from is really difficult. Many people who have, there was some talk about how Hindus in fact were more careless about their documentation. Muslims who are always, on the edge and always frightened about what they will be called to account to, have kept some kind of documentation. So there are multiple stories also, of course, about what actually has happened, and we do know that about 33 people have died in the entire process of the NRC. 28 of them in detention camps. Now, the detention camps also are something which totally flies against any kind of human rights or principles that our country is supposed to be adhering to. We have conventions, we have agreed to these human rights conventions, and yet something like a detention center where people are just picked up and put there and then have to submit before the foreigners tribunal. These are completely bizarre situations. Sitting here in Mumbai, we cannot even imagine how bad it is. But this is exactly what is happening right now. Now, in that entire process, while people were still scrambling around and trying to find and go to the lawyers, and there are batteries of lawyers who have been who have been working with them to be able to get the documentation done. There was a busload of people who were coming and had just about 1.5 days of a deadline to be able to go and submit their documents, and they had to travel from a great distance. They had an accident, they were not able to travel. So there's a lot of this kind of ferment. And for some of the people who lived through the partition, who are still alive here and who can tell us, this entire displacement, this notion of not belonging was very, very strong, and it continues to be very strong. Now, in that entire process, we have had this BJP government which managed to win the elections with a huge majority, and then started to push through very, very quickly with hardly any discussion. I don't know how many of you are political science students from the political science department. I hope you all watched those two debates in the Lok Sabha as well as in the Rajya Sabha. It would have been a very good education for you all in what should have been a political process but did not happen. Yesterday, for instance, in the Rajya Sabha, when there was a discussion, the Home Minister of India, Mr. Amit Shah, decided to make, as usual, sweeping statements, completely ahistorical statements, and clear lies. And when members of the opposition called him out on that, Rajya Sabha TV, which is supposed to be mandated to broadcast the proceedings, cut the proceedings. They actually stopped the proceedings. This is, we talk about human rights, but we have to actually look at what is happening here. We have to look at the kind of censorship that is happening at a time when it is being broadcast across the country. Anyway, so this is in terms of the way in which the government decided to bring in the cap and push it through. And of course, what we also have, apart from the Citizenship Amendment Bill, is the plan to have a pan-India NRC and to have what is called the National Population Register. Now, the National Population Register is not a new thing. It's been there from 2010 actually. The 2011 census did have the National Population Register, and all of us participated in it without realizing it. What's going to happen this time? From 2020, from April 2020, when they start the National Population Register, is all of us will have to give details of us being usual residents for the last 6 months, or we will be residents for the next 6 months. So we are expected to register ourselves. We will also, all of us, every one of us, will have to, not just people in the North-East or in Assam, will also have to say, give evidence that we will be staying in a particular place for the last 6 months. So if you're students who've come from outside and are studying in Wilson College, you will have to give those details. It will also be biometric, it will be digital, and it will be linked to our Aadhaar. So I'm visualizing a situation where at any given point of time, we are going to be tracked wherever we move. Wherever we travel, whether we move for just because, for personal reasons, we move for work, we move because we don't have a choice, but wherever citizens are, they are going to be tracked. That is what the National Population Register is going to do. And for people who, who are already targeted, especially communities that are already targeted, you can imagine this really frightening scenario. I want to touch upon briefly, I'm not going to go into detail because I know that I also have to look at what is happening in Kashmir. But in the North-East, and I'm coming back to the North-East because, going back and forth from what is happening in the North-East to what is going to happen to the rest of this country is something we all have to now contend with. These are not isolated places that we are going to be studying in some, rarefied manner. There are going to be things that we have to look at because this is going to happen everywhere, and we have to understand that. So what happened with the North-East, of course, is, like I said earlier, and I didn't want to go into the detail, there is a long history of people from the North-East who have been fighting for their identity. There are very, very strong and very tenacious ethnic movements, tribal movements that have been on in the North-East. There are insurgency movements in the North-East. Manipur has faced the worst of it, of course. And with the FASPA, which is the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, there has been a huge amount of police and army excesses on the population in these countries, in these areas. Encounters, impunity, encounters, rape, impunity is the norm. There really isn't any. So when we talk about human rights, we have to look at the way in which the state especially, and with its agencies, with the army especially, has contributed to this kind of human rights violations. This year, at the beginning of this year, we had two journalists one journalist and another social activist who were arrested because they made these Facebook posts about the the ministers or the chief ministers, and both of them had been arrested. One was arrested for sedition. But it's not really about journalists being arrested for sedition. It's about the kind of human rights violations that ordinary people have faced. This is a little bit of an extract from a very good judgment that was delivered by the Supreme Court, by Justices Lokur and Lalit in the Supreme Court. It says here, it doesn't matter whether, and this was about hundreds of families who submitted petitions before the Supreme Court, about 1,528 cases, where for the first time, after years and years of struggle with this, before the Supreme Court, they managed to get some acknowledgement of the fact that there was impunity, and the army had absolutely refused to even acknowledge that there was any kind of accountability needed for the kind of excesses. So it says here, it doesn't matter whether the victim is a common person or a militant or a terrorist, nor does it matter whether the aggressor was a common person or the state. The law is the same and has to apply to everyone. Now this, we need to go beyond just this judgment. The fact that this judgment came at all is a big thing. We need to go beyond this judgment and actually secure justice for the people who have been killed. But that is, with the kind of situation that we are seeing today in the North-East, with the kind of ferment that we are seeing, with the kind of division in terms of NRC or the camp, justice for past crimes are almost forgotten, because now we are dealing with the situation that is happening on the ground today. So there is of course a long list of atrocities which one can actually go into. This is about some of the lists that I can quickly cull out. People from the North-East have protested up. They have fought against it. They have tried everything they can possibly do, including the long hunger strike by Aram Sharmila. it has not got them anywhere. So there's a sense of alienation, the sense of not belonging is very, very strong, and we are not, none of us are even, addressing it in any way. To some extent, when there was this exodus of the North-East students from and people from the North-East in Bangalore, Pune, and Delhi, people actually woke up to the fact that there were so many people from the North-East outside and living and trying to live their lives as students, as people working in different places. But there's absolutely no acknowledgement of the fact that there was such an exodus, that there was such a fear psychosis, that they all wanted to go back. Why did this happen? Some of them have come back, of course, but what about what actually happened to get them to that stage? There is nothing that even addresses some of this. I want to move now from the Northeast to what is happening in Kashmir. And the situation in Kashmir is very, very different right now. The struggle there also is extremely different. Partly because there has been a very, very long, for 72 years again, consistent struggles, and it has its ups and downs, but it has been a struggle for independence, a struggle for self-determination, a struggle for autonomy from India. It has gone from one gamut to another. Now, when this is actually part of the report that two of us from the Free Speech Collective actually visited Kashmir about a month after the lockdown, the current lockdown. And we tried to look at what is happening with the media, starting from the media, also looking at the communication blockade. So I just want to share a little bit about that and then go into the human rights situation there. Why are we so interested in looking at the media? Well, the media is just one part of what is happening to the people of Kashmir. But our looking at the media was really to provide some kind of a window into what is happening and the kind of stories, the kind of news, the kind of information that should be coming out, but was not. As all of you know, there was some kind of a build-up to August 5th. There was a build-up in the sense that Amarnath Yatris were told to leave, and the Yatra itself for the first time was suspended, was actually called off. How do you have a pilgrimage which is called off? But that's a different story. The Yatra was called off. Tourists had to go back. They had to leave. They were told to pack their bags and vacate hotels almost overnight. About 35,000 troops were moved in. So there was a big deployment which people could see. So people in Kashmir already knew that something was going to happen. And on August 4th, the internet was completely suspended. Now when this happened, on August 5th, as all of you know, when the government pushed through the abrogation of Article 370 and subsequently that of Article 35A, the people of Kashmir got to know it only when they got to see it on the little bit of cable television that was there around that time. The newspapers were not able to publish. So for about 20 days really, journalists, no one was able to even travel, was able to even go anywhere because there was such a clamp down in terms of not just communication, not just the internet, which was for the first time near total, absolutely total, but checkpoints at every turn, about 15 to 20 checkpoints from here to maybe Charni Road. So physical movement itself was restricted, completely restricted. Now, as some journalists we spoke to said, communication was really at the core of this present conflict, the present phase of the Kashmir conflict. And while the media has been delegitimized, this complete lockdown, this complete is what journalists said was a zero news zone. There was no information at all that was coming out. So many of the problems that would normally occur in a situation like this, people are not able to travel, students are not able to get to their educational establishments, wherever it is, whether it's schools or colleges. People are not able to access medical help which they need. People are not able to go to places of work. None of this, none of normal life can actually happen. Forget about trade, forget about business trade, shops being open or anything like that. Just the ordinary day-to-day aspects of life. Buying essential commodities. So people have in Kashmir learned to hoard. They learn to keep and stock up anyway because they never know when the next clampdown will happen. So to some extent there was some, and already because of this build-up, they knew that there was something that was going to happen. So there was some amount of stocking up of essentials. But beyond that, all normal life has been at a standstill for the last 4.5 months. There's a high degree of self-censorship. So what also happens is that in a situation like this, not only do you have ordinary citizens being really frightened by the kind of militarization by the army, very heavily armed people at every turn, at every street corner, but you also have media that is too frightened to be able to tell the real news, what actually is happening, the number of people who are being detained, the night raids, people who are being picked up, the youth who are being picked up, young minors who are being picked up and kept in for this time, for instance, the army did something very different from what it used to do earlier. It used to bring the youth, keep them in the police station for the entire day, send them back home. So, or they would move them from one police station to the other, so parents would be running about trying to find out exactly where they were. There were reports of how they you had to go to the police station and look for the places where some member of your family had been moved. So either it could be, there would be a list which says that this person is now in Agra jail or in Bareilly jail. There are about, some people have just been released from Agra jail two days ago. So there is total uncertainty. And as you all must have read in the papers, the habeas corpus petitions that are being filed in either the Jammu Kashmir High Court or the Supreme Court don't get you anywhere. So there is actually suspension of any kind of legal liberties. So of course the media, is unable to publish anything of consequence. So what they do instead is fill up their newspapers with completely frivolous news, which is really of no use at all. And but there's a lot of frustration. There's a huge amount of frustration. And a lot of repression in terms of journalists who are trying to actually circumvent this and try and get any kind of news out. It's interesting that they still don't give up, of course. I'm glad that they still keep fighting. So there were these women journalists, for instance, who were driving and the checkpoints kept coming up. So the two of them just decided to play doctor-patient. So every time they were stopped, they said, ye doctor hai, ye patient hai, and then they managed to go ahead because they were not stopped. In another case, we have a journalist who smuggled himself into a political leader's house. The leader was detained on house arrest and he smuggled himself in as a vegetable vendor and he managed to get information. So these are stories they do manage. You know of the case in the BBC when the BBC journalists actually put out that video of people who were protesting in a place in downtown Srinagar, where they managed to get this and let the government know that there were protests happening on the streets. Yeah, so this is, of course, of journalists who, what I should tell you all is that the communication clampdown that we are seeing here today is actually a precursor of many of these kind of internet shutdowns and a lot of the kind of repression that journalists have been facing in Kashmir. There was a journalist called Kamran Yusuf, who's a young photojournalist, and he was arrested by the NIA on charges of being a stone pelter. Another journalist is still in jail right now, Asif Sultan. That's actually a picture of the fruit market in Shopian, which is completely deserted. This is the place where all the fruit, the apples, this is, just before this entire thing started was the apple harvest season. You would have got a flood of apples into the rest of India, but absolutely nothing. No apples were being bought, sold, nothing. There was totally a shutdown. And continuous thing about how there's been complete shutdown. A lot of journalists who have been arrested or detained. This is Asif Sultan, who is still in jail because he wrote a kind of profile piece 1 year after Burhan Mani's death, and he was picked up by the police because he happened to get some photograph of Burhan Mani as a child, and he put that into his profile, as journalists normally do. They do dig out information from somewhere or the other, Facebook or something like that, and then he was charged with being a militant or supporting militants. He was a journalist who wrote for the Hindu, and he happened to quote a police officer, an unnamed police officer, and he was picked up by the police, and the police wanted to question him and say, just come and talk to us, you just have a... So there's a lot of very insidious kind of surveillance and insidious kind of intimidation of the media there. Now, of course, I'm going to stop with my presentation of the media clampdown and the communication clampdown, which continues till today, of course. It's unprecedented, it's illegal. There is absolutely no way in which the Supreme Court has been hearing a petition by Anuradha Bhasin, the editor of Kashmir Times, which is challenging the internet shutdown. And the government has had absolutely no defense except that it says that not a single bullet was fired and no blood has been shed in Kashmir. So the notion that things are normal, the notion that everything is normal and that there is no opposition to the abrogation of Article 370, that there is no, that people are welcoming it, is so completely wrong. But there is no way in which one can independently verify what people really feel, what people are really going through, because there is such a huge clampdown. So when the media is suppressed, the news that the media tries to bring to all of us is also shut. And we then hear from friends, we get information from friends, we get information, but this is all unverified and absolutely information that cannot be held accountable. So this becomes a very, very serious situation for everyone, really, because it affects the way in which we access our information, and that is really central to the way in which the government has behaved in Kashmir. In Kerala recently, there was a student who challenged her institution because she had been denied the use of her internet when she was in the hostel. And the Kerala High Court has given this wonderful judgment which says the internet is a fundamental right. Now when we look at the entire gamut of human rights, and we look at it in, and you all are doing it in this festival, so I'm not going to go into those details, I'm just bringing a bit of this to you all. We look at information, we look at access to information as a fundamental right, and we look at those tools that give us those access. And the tools also then become very important. So Frank LaRue, who was the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights, for freedom of expression, a few years ago gave us this excellent document really, looking at the internet as a fundamental right and looking at access to the internet. What we are seeing today is governments across the world, not just in India, but across the world, shutting down this access. And you can just imagine a situation where you are not able to even find, to even access your mobile, to be able to talk to anyone, to be able to put across any of the, the WhatsApp groups or the Facebook or anything else that you are on. So this kind of access really is, this cutting off of access is actually something that we will all be contending with more and more, because governments are beginning to realize that people mobilize, people speak of their plight, people speak of the human rights violations that they face across the world, and they express themselves. And when they do, the first act of articulating that itself is then shut down. There's much more that I can say. I wanted to end with this picture because it's actually for me a very pathetic indication of very different aspects of human rights that we are seeing in Kashmir. There are about 35,000, 40,000, they're huge troops, and I believe yesterday there was some report that many of these troops were now moved to the North-East because there's trouble in the North-East. And it's actually really sad, because when you think of it, parts of India, different parts of India are facing huge conflict. There is conflict in Kashmir, there's conflict in Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand, in Bastar especially. There is conflict in the North-East. And what we are seeing is this excessive militarization in dealing with this conflict. The militarization that also brings about the kind of abuse that we have seen in the North-East with AFSPA and all the other things. And the impunity that goes with it, but that's a very different discussion altogether. But the point I want to make, and what I really want to end with, is what are we doing to these youth? Why are we displacing these young men and women also from all these parts of the country to deal with policing of people's issues and people's conflicts and people's struggles and suppressing them? So what is really happening while we are discussing the larger issues of human rights violations, I feel we need to also pay some attention to this. The day we left Srinagar, it was about a month after the abrogation, Srinagar airport was chock-a-block with people from the CRPF and BSF and things like that, all the paramilitary forces. And most of them came from Jharkhand or from Chhattisgarh. You could make out from their name tags, from the names with. And there's a huge Tamil Nadu regiment in Kashmir. So what you have is the Naga regiment now stationed in Bastar. You have the Tamil Nadu regiment in Kashmir. You have the Bastar, soldiers from there going to Kashmir and now going to the North-East. So it's really a kind of game where there's a lot of this kind of use of young people from our country, young people who are given jobs because they take on a job in the military because they really need it, because there is such huge poverty that they do need it, and then they are fighting each other. And this is, this, and it's really a sad situation that we are looking at in terms of what this country is going to go through in the next few years, what you all are going to grow up to. I'll stop here. Happy to take questions.
Actually comes from a state of utter confusion and helplessness. But we see different avenues constantly being shut down. There is no legal recourse to help Kashmiris or the people in North-East. People in the media can't report freely after one point of time. You can't be saying things on social media because suddenly there are shadow bans, or your posts don't get traction because the algorithm does not want that. So, I know people in Kashmir and people in North-East are constantly agitating. We're seeing the videos seeing whatever little reports we can see, and we can see the deaths taking place there because of these agitations. But what can people who are relatively more secure at this moment outside of these areas, what can we do to help in any way when it comes to these movements?
I think you people have, I really must say this to all of you. You have underestimated yourselves. And I'm not saying this, I'm not saying that in a negative way. Each and every one of you here in this classroom, how many of you, I don't know, but each and every one of you who are sitting here and who are willing to come and listen, even to someone like me who is not, as I said, an expert on either of these two areas, so I will not give you the entire historical background or the legal background. And you all are willing to listen, you all are willing to organize a program like this. Believe it or not, but this must be the third or the fourth such discussion on either the North-East or on Kashmir being held in Mumbai. So actually what you all are doing is superb, it's excellent, because it's not being done even to talk about something like this. Like you correctly said, social media, there is so much of surveillance, there's so much of cracking down, and many times I have found myself typing something and then cancelling it because I'm not sure whether I want to go through just expressing whatever I feel like at any given point of time. And that has never really happened to me before. So the fact that you all are talking, the fact that you all are having this itself is really very important, and it's a start. It's a start. Don't underestimate that. I don't know where it will go, but the fact that you all are even doing this is something that has not happened anywhere else. And that's why as soon as I got that email, I quickly said, I agree, I'll come. Because to even have a discussion, there were students in Bangalore who were having a discussion soon after our report was released, and there were obviously people who opposed it and who refused to let it go. They just refused to have anything. So the space for dialogue, space for discussion, the space for learning has really shrunk. And that's apart from all of that, the battle that we are facing in terms of even the political discussions about what should really happen with NRC. As you heard Savita saying, what is the solution? What do we find? Even to discuss that is not happening. So it's really important. Don't underestimate, just keep having discussions. Have more and more of them. Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a huge challenge, because even within our own families, for instance, we will find that people within our families who are otherwise very reasonable, very humane in their responses, would take a very rigid stand, and it's extremely difficult then to be able to discuss with them. But because they're members of our family, we find ways in which we continue to interact. We continue to find other means of getting in touch with them and speaking to them. So, in larger societies, there is an immediate sense of, especially after, for instance, Article 370 happened, there was a sense that, yeah, अच्छा है, ज़रूरत है, ज़रूरी है, let them suffer. Kashmiris think too much of themselves. People have said all kinds of things without even looking at the legal situation. Now, even with what is happening with the NRC or with CAD, I'm not saying that there is a uniformity in our responses. Many of us who are not from the North-East will not even understand how NRC is important for the people of the North-East. Because we tend to think of it as an issue of migration. We don't think of it as an influx. We don't think of it in terms of the resources being taken away from the people who live there. We don't want to go into the issue of sons of the soil, which I really didn't go into. But, Maharashtra has seen a whole struggle on sons of the soil in the 60s. And it has not been a good one. So, for us to be able to understand this and to comprehend it and then find an articulation is really important. But we have to hear from the people who are actually directly affected. Before we impose our views, we need to hear from them. In Kashmir, we don't have that space at all. Absolutely not. In the North-East, to some extent, we do. Because I think the people of the North-East have been, especially in what is happening with Assam, there is a very strong and very concerted kind of point of view that has been coming across. And others are being forced to listen and therefore engage. But Kashmir is a completely different ball game altogether. And I think, many of us don't want to speak of our own personal fears and our own personal location. How do we feel about things like self-determination? How do we feel about things like independence? How do we feel about whether this country should be separated according to its different units? You'll have political science students, so you will be dealing with issues of federalism and things like that. How do we deal with that? When it actually comes to the crux, what do we feel? What is patriotism? What is jingoism? How do we look at the difference? Is there a difference between patriotism and jingoism? We don't even want to get there. I really don't think so. I don't think any of us. Why don't some of you all speak?
One of my friends has said that they blame themselves for not knowing so much about this. But for me, I think they shouldn't blame themselves. Because if the media doesn't know their work, everyone knows things from the media. So if the media doesn't know, how are they going to know what happened in different parts of the media? So I don't think they should blame themselves. And one question I have for you as a journalist is, for example, when things were happening in Kashmir, many journalists went to Kashmir and they covered as much as they can. But when things happen in some places in the West, for example, I'm from Manipur, so I can speak for Manipur. In 2015, when the 3 billion were passed, my community was essential, and the tribal people were against it, and so many people were killed. So at that time, the bigger media house in India doesn't cover much of it. Similarly, for this year, in February and September, when there was 5 days and 6 days internet shutdown in Manipur, the media doesn't cover it. And now also, after 2 or 3 days after the protest over in Tripura and Assam, and after the videos were sent by different people to different places, now people come in. And yesterday, day before yesterday, all the Manipur student union had a protest against the citizenship amendment, and they had a total shutdown for 14 hours in Manipur. So, given that, last night the secretary of the Manipur student union was arrested, and he is still in the police station. So, I want to ask why the media is so uninterested in what is happening, and why they can't still form a proper connection with the local media perspectives to provide accurate information, not just environmental information, but accurate information on what is happening.
The media is a very complex beast. It's not just what you see most of the time. What you do not see is the structures that the media operates with, and the fact that the media is today much more fractured than it was earlier, much more polarized than it was earlier. In the last 10 years maybe, that polarization has got worse. So we actually have sections of the media who speak with a certain mindset and a certain framework, and they push that. Certain sections of the media try to be neutral and try to be more even and balanced. There's certain sections of the media who are quite indifferent and couldn't care less, and they just go on. So the media, at one level, it plays to the galleries. It looks for the way in which it can increase its sensational appeal. There's one section of the media that is very clearly polarized and therefore will maybe put forward the government's line or toe a certain line. And there is one section that just won't even go to that extent. So this is the mainstream media. And then there is the other media that all of us are more familiar with, that we are more comfortable with, the media that we all use and we all share. And it's a far more egalitarian exchange of information, with the the added the problem of it being mostly unverified, or one would have to make extra efforts to see that one does not peddle fake news by mistake or otherwise. So you have a media that is looking at revenue, so it needs to be there just because that story is important and then it's good for its TRP. There is a media that is polarized, so it has a clear agenda and it will push that agenda. And then there is the media in between, which really couldn't care less, and then there's this other vast and very unregulated media. So you have to look at which media you're criticizing, and you need to, because while we are looking at all these different kinds of media, we also have the state that's looking at all this media. And just this morning, for instance, my colleague in Manipur, she's a very senior journalist, she sent me this this notification that came from the Manipur government, from the Meghalaya government, sorry. It's a DIPR notification which says that a lot of newspapers and a lot of dailies within the state are still publishing statements of organizations calling for bunds in the North-East. The most recent publication was in the news edition of the Shillong Times dated 7 December called NESO Calls for North-East Bunds Against CAB. In this regard, the Assistant Inspector General of Police has requested the Home Department that congruous action may be initiated. So here we have a government directive which is saying that if you publish anything of this, any of this kind of news, we are going to be watching you and we are going to take you. We are going to take action against you. So at one level, even this media, the media that one would think of as partisan and polarized and all, is constantly being watched. So it's a very difficult situation. It's not, very few within the media have the courage to be able to go out and tell the news as it really should be told. It's really, and when we see it in Kashmir, we see a complete clampdown. Shillong Times, for instance, the editor was pulled up by the High Court for contempt just recently, and she had a petrol bomb, thrown into her house just a few months ago, in January or February. Patricia Mukherjee. So it's actually a very dangerous situation, and it's not, while one would continuously, of course, hold the media to account, and one should, we also have to understand what the media is all about and then respond. So then we also, as intelligent and informed citizens, can make use of the media the way we want to, rather than allow the media to make use of us. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's really what we should be doing.